Yesterday, we received unvalidated leaks of the Canon EOS R1, Canon's much anticipated flagship mirrorless camera, that it would have a 30 megapixel full-frame stacked sensor, capable of shooting unlimited 40 frames per second, and to be able to burst up to 240 frames per second, and that's high-speed continuous stills. The video specs will be 6.7K and would include Canon Log 2. But the specs came from a Chinese site with a poor track record of being accurate and mentioned it's coming from an unknown source. So, can these leaked specs actually be of the Canon EOS R1? Are they close? Well, stick around after this short message as we take a look at the details. But first, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest camera news. And for all the minor news stories, all those news stories not quite big enough to have their own separate video, follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. When I first saw these specs, I didn't quite trust them. And it wasn't because they didn't seem plausible, because they did. They seem actually very plausible. It's that they're coming from the Chinese Weibo site, from a source that's been known to get things wrong, and they were quoting an unknown source. So all that together, I just didn't believe the likelihood of them, even though they did seem plausible. So I'm not yet ready to say that these are the actual leaked specifications of the Canon EOS R1. But then earlier this morning, Canon Rumors said this: there has been recent talk around the web about the Canon EOS R1 specifications, and we've been working hard to verify the information before posting them. It turns out the specifications are pretty close to reality, at least according to a solid source. Okay, so they're pretty close, at least according to a single source, and Canon Rumors has this as a CR2, not a CR3. So does that mean we're going to get a 32 megapixel sensor instead of a 30 megapixel sensor? Does that mean it's just going to be a stacked sensor instead of a, well, I'll get to the specifications shortly, but there's a bit of a surprise there. And what about the still shooting rates? 40 frames per second, is that lossless RAW? Is that lossy RAW? And what about the burst rate? And these are stills hybrid specs of 240 frames per second in stills, but it's unlikely to be, I'm pretty sure it's unlikely to be unlimited, because I'll get to the math in just a little bit. So what I thought I would do for the rest of this video is let's go ahead and take a look at a deep dive into the specifications. I didn't go into as deep of a dive as I did yesterday, and we'll take a look at how realistic it is for some of these capabilities and what we might also see in terms of storage capabilities of the Canon EOS R1. So taking a look at the sensor, according to the Weibo site, it's supposed to have a 30 megapixel full frame DGO stacked sensor. Now, when I talked about this yesterday, we didn't talk about it being a DGO. A dual gain sensor, that's a pretty big deal, and that's one of the reasons why we could expect to have, well, improvements in low light performance, dynamic range, and all that sort of stuff. Having a stacked sensor is a big upgrade over the 1DX Mark III, but having a stacked DGO sensor is definitely an upgrade over the Canon EOS R3. And like the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, the Canon EOS R1 has pre-buffer shooting of 1 second. Now let's take a look at those continuous shooting speeds. 40 frames per second with a 30 megapixel sensor. If we assume a file size of 30 megabytes, and it's not going to be that, but it's going to be pretty close. Let's do a little bit of math here, and that works out to be about, what, 1.2 gigabytes per second, not bits. And that's certainly well within the range of the current specs of a CF Express Type B card that the 1DX Mark III has, that the R3 has, and the Canon EOS R5 Mark I has. But things get a little bit interesting when we start to talk about 120 frames per second. Now I'm going to take a look at the notes here, because it does say that it's going to be up to 120 frames per second full-featured continuous shooting. So what does full-featured continuous shooting mean? I'm not sure, but I think what they're trying to get to is that it's going to be full sensor readout, so 120 frames per second. So that's a whole lot faster, and that gives us a speed of around, let me just take a look here at the math. I believe it's, so 120 times 30, that's 3.6 gigabytes per second. The maximum theoretical speed of a CF Express Type B card, well, it's around 2,000, and right now I think the maximum's around 1.5, it could be 1.6. However, the CF Express Association just passed last year approval for Gen 4, and we actually have on the market, it's a rather limited supply by just a single vendor, that's ProGrade, a CF Express Gen 3 card that's capable of 3,000 gigabytes per second. Now that's still under the speed required to shoot unlimited 120 frames per second on a 30 megapixel sensor. However, if we bump up the buffer a little bit more, we could probably shoot at that sustained rate for several seconds, maybe 5 or even 10. However, and this is a big however here, as a sports and fast action journalist, I can't imagine anybody wanting to just hold down that shutter button, because part of what these people want to be able to do is quickly get the shot and then take that shot, do any quick changes they need to do to it, and then upload it. And if they're having to sift through hundreds of images, it would be a little bit of a problem. So I don't expect a huge increase to the buffer, but definitely a possibility. But now, taking a look at 240 frames per second. Again, this is according to the source from Weibo. Well, that would require somewhere over, what, 7 gigabytes per second, 7.2 or 7.6 gigabytes per second. And that's not even possible with Gen 4 CF Express Type B. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, if we had a CF Express Type C card, that's certainly well within the range of a Gen 4, which has a maximum theoretical limit of 8 gigabytes per second. However, I don't think they're going to put a CF Express Type C card in this camera. I think what is most likely is supporting a burst mode of up to 240. They might allow it for a second, maybe 2, and by increasing the buffer capacity inside the camera, which will use something like NVMe, multi-channel PCI, that will support them being able to deliver this. So all the continuous still shooting speeds are, well, plausible. They make sense. The math backs it up. But as a sports and fast action photographer, as a fashion photographer, do you really want to hold down that shutter button for a continuous amount of time to be able to shoot at 120 or 240 frames per second? How often would you actually need to do that? Seems a little bit out there, doesn't it? All right, now let's talk about dynamic range. So the R1 is supposed to have improved dynamic range, not only over the R5, but over the R3, and that's thanks largely to having a DGO, a dual gain output sensor that's stacked, whereas the R3 just has a stacked sensor. So having better dynamic range and low light performance is certainly expected, at least compared to the Canon EOS R3 and the R5 Mark I. You'll be happy to know that the Canon EOS R1, again, according to the latest leaked specifications, is capable of 16-bit RAW DGO, and that's for photo shooting. And this last one, I'm going to read it to you because the English isn't very good. It's machine translated, in camera, depth of field, stacked RAW. So I'm not exactly sure what that means. I don't know if it has anything to do with shooting stacked. I don't know if it has anything to do with how the EVF perceives depth of field or anything like that. So this one, I'm just going to kind of leave there right now. Maybe you might have a better idea. It's early in the morning here, so my brain isn't completely functioning. I couldn't even say focus stacking, which is what I was trying to say just a few sentences ago. In the last few months of 2023, I talked about several patent applications, specifically JP 2023-149-423. It deals with improving autofocus, not only the speed, but the accuracy using AI or AI recognition. And that's when an object moves temporarily out of frame and back in, or is temporarily obscured by something in the frame. And this patent, along with several others, back up the latest claims that the Canon EOS R1 is going to have much better subject detection, high-speed autofocus that's going to be able to better predict the object's trajectory, so that way we can keep the object or subject in focus. And that's a really big deal. I kind of laugh now when new cameras come out, say they have the fastest autofocus system. I don't really care. The speed of the autofocus system is great. How many autofocus points? Again, I don't care. The coverage of the screen, it's pretty well 100% now. So what I care about is the autofocus system thinking like me. I get that eye-controlled autofocus where I hold my eye up to the EVF and it sees what I'm looking at and it maintains focus. But to also be able to not pulse and go crazy when the subject or object is hidden temporarily or moves off screen or out of frame, I think that's a really big improvement. And that's something I really do hope is in this camera, but based on what I saw in the patent filings, I think there was 3 or 4 patent applications, and the only one I can remember right now is that 2023-149-423. All right, let's get to some of the other specifications because we've got a lot to get through here. The sync rate is 1/1250th of a second. Now, the video specifications for a video shooter aren't that impressive, but for anybody who's a photographer that does need to capture video, rest assured these video specs are going to give you what you need. So the maximum resolution of the Canon EOS R1, assuming a 30 megapixel sensor, is 6.7K at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second, as well as 50 and 60 frames per second. Now, it can go all the way up to 120 frames per second at 4.2K, but in 4K, this is where you're able to get both DCI and UHD, although I'd be surprised if we don't have DCI in the other oversampled resolutions as well. But we're going to get DCI and UHD. It'll support Super 35 with Canon's 1.6 times crop. And as far as log profiles, many of you have been asking for Canon Log 2 for an awful long time. This camera does have Canon Log 3 as well as Canon Log 2. But no Canon Log 1. That seems like a little bit of a miss. Why not throw that one in as well, and you can have the whole gamut? And there's no mention of a new log profile, Canon Log 4, which I do find a little bit surprising. No Canon Log 4, no new log profile for this new camera. Could that be saved for a cinema camera? We'll just have to wait and see. The camera will also have 12-bit raw cinema raw. Let me try that again. The Canon will have 12-bit cinema raw light, and it's going to be more ergonomic. It's going to be designed slightly different from the Canon EOS R3, and most likely a little bit heavier as well. Now, in terms of CF Express cards, I have no doubt it's going to have dual CF Express card slots, and I'm willing to bet you, I'll bet you $1 for a coffee, that it's going to have dual CF Express Type B cards. Now, let's take a look at the price. Now, I've assumed that the price of this camera, based on historical data, is going to be around $5,000 to $6,000. I've said for the longest time that we could see a price anywhere from $64.99 to $69.99. But if we take a look at the price of the Nikon Z9, and if these specs do hold out, it's possible, as I said previously, that we could see a price of around $59.99 to $69.99. And we just had a price drop of the R3 down to $49.99. And this is what Canon Rumors had to say about the price this morning. I think we're looking at the Canon EOS R1 coming in between $59.99 and $69.99 if we had to guess. And yes, we're guessing at this point. And I gotta tell you, I've got a strange feeling about this. Have you ever been driving your car and you get a sense there's something wrong with the car? Maybe it's the steering, maybe it's a sound, maybe it's a certain feel. You just don't feel like the car's right. Now, you're not getting any warning messages on the dashboard, but nevertheless, you take it into this dealership for service, the service center, because all your years of experience tell you that something's wrong. They check it up, they charge you $300, 300 pounds or euros, and guess what? They didn't find anything. No surprises. So you take the car, you keep driving, and then 3 weeks later, something breaks and you're stranded at the side of the road. That's how I feel about these leaked specifications that we're getting from an unknown source, from a source on Weibo that has a poor track record of getting things right. I just get a strange feeling about this. Now, Canon Rumors has said that the information is mostly right based on a solid source, but they don't provide corrections or updates to the information from that solid source. So I reached out to two people today. I reached out to Andrea at Sony Alpha Rumors, and he says, yeah, he also doesn't trust this source on Weibo. And I reached out to my source the other day who also said that this camera is supposed to have beyond insane capabilities based on a conversation he had with a camera insider. And he says, as a sports fast action photographer, that's his daily driver. He says, these specs don't impress me all that much. And 120 and 240 frames per second, it just doesn't make any sense. You're trying to get the shot, you're trying to nail it. The lens matters more than anything else, like the 100 to 300 millimeter, or the, well, actually, that's the latest one with f2.8. So where I'm at this point is these look very plausible, very realistic. Will it be a 32 versus a 30 megapixel? Will it have a global shutter versus a stacked DGO sensor or just a stack sensor? I don't know at this point, but as I said yesterday in my video when I talked about these specifications, they do seem plausible, but let's wait for some validation. We're very close to an announcement. We're supposed to get an announcement on the heels of CP+. It could be some sort of teaser, it could be some sort of development announcement, and I hope it's a development announcement because what that will do is give us some sort of specifications. Back in October of 2019, Canon gave us a rather detailed set of specifications in their development of the 1DX Mark III. And you might also notice that in this video, for much of this video, I've had smart pre-order links for the Canon EOS R1. And you might be confused by what those are. Well, I have a tradition on this channel that when it comes to major announcements, what I do in the weeks, well, about a month prior to that announcement, I put smart pre-order links up. And what you want to do is copy down this link, because as soon as the embargo is lifted, these will function. You won't have to go searching for Canon's pre-order links. I've got them for B&H and Adorama. And what they will do is they'll show you every single kit version of the Canon EOS R1. Kit versions put out by Canon themselves if they do have a kit, but also different packages that B&H and Adorama might assemble. So I've got separate ones for each one there. And just go ahead and bookmark those, and those will work once the embargo is lifted. And I will be doing a live stream as long as I have an idea of when the announcement is, at least several hours ahead of time. I will be doing a live stream covering the information live. And one other thing I forgot to mention, I was surprised by looking at the data that 30% of you watching are subscribers. That means 60% of you aren't. So please go ahead and subscribe. It really does help this channel grow. And if you're looking at purchasing any camera gear, such as, well, I guess not anything I talked about in this video, such as the R1 hasn't been released, but if you're considering buying the R3 with a price drop down to $49.99, the R5 with a price drop down $500 or anything else, there's still a lot of sales on that were started on Black Friday, then please consider using my affiliate links down below. These guys right here, I do have them in the description down below. I get anywhere from 2 to 12% back, and it really does help support this channel. It's what's allowing me to buy the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. The R6, I'm kind of holding off on that one right now, because based on what I'm seeing, if these specs are real, it looks like the R1 is really designed at high-speed photographers, fast-action fashion photographers, which I am not. Which, if I don't get the R1, that's good news, because it gives me more funding towards new lenses that may be announced. And we are supposed to be getting a big Sigma announcement, according to Sony Alpha rumors, and according to Canon rumors, that big Sigma announcement is going to talk about support for the RF mount. So who knows? Anyhow, let me know what you think about these specifications. Now, some of you did say, Simon, these specifications look like the Canon EOS R3 Mark II. And I agree, there's a lot of you that believe this, and this is plausible. However, the R3 Mark II isn't supposed to come out until 2025, and everything is gearing up for the R1, so we should get some other leaked specifications. We should get some validation, is really more of it, on the R1, and then as we get closer, we'll get pricing, we'll get leaked images, and before you know it, it'll be on the market, and then you yourself can decide if this camera is for you. But that's it for now. Have yourself a great day, have a great weekend, and we'll see you again soon.